some of the anti-federalists were afraid in the 18th century that a woman could become president, which now, could very well easily happen. But at the time, and that really shows that the founders were really taking kind of a bold step during the 18th century. Because the anti-federalists really called it. They understood the way the language was written. Let's see. This particular section, it talks about the congressman cannot serve an executive role at the same time that they're a congressman. And that came from an abuse that was happening in England, and what the Whig Party referred to as corruption. They called it corruption, where where the king was basically kind of stacking the deck. He was placing people that had kind of dual responsibility, so that those individuals would then, of course, approve any of his mandates and legislation. The House was given different prerogatives, it's talked about in the book, as far as kind of overseeing their own institution. For example, choosing their speaker, creating their own rules, judging their own elections and the returns, setting their member qualifications, things like that. The House was, and this actually is true with the Senate as well, the House and the Senate were both mandated to maintain a journal of their anything that was happening within their body, but they were also given the opportunity to keep some of the sections secret of the journal. Members are immune from arrest. I don't know if you remember, but recently there was a House member related to Kennedy, was it? Who was drunk, and basically he used the excuse that he was going to vote at the House, and so he was able to avoid arrest because of that. But he was driving drunk.
Oh.
So they're immune from arrest. They're also immune from any kind of retribution, lawsuits, things like that, from things that they say on the floor in speeches, and especially from other areas within the government. I found this interesting, and this would be going to apply to Wisconsin. The House can veto any effort by the Senate if they try to adjourn in order to avoid voting on something. The Senate also has that same capability, that they can veto the House adjourning on anything to avoid voting. The House has the executive authority, or exclusive authority, excuse me, I got to read a little better. Initiate revenue, they usually are the ones that put forth budgets, and to impeach. And impeaching is the same as indicting a person for misconduct, and then that person, the case is then sent to the Senate, as I mentioned earlier. The House has the responsibility of electing a president if there's no clear winner, when the electorates come back and there's no clear winner or there's a tie. In the Senate has the authority to select the vice president in the same manner. That later changed when president and vice president started running on the same ticket. One area I thought was kind of interesting, Congress could actually pass legislation that didn't have clear mandates or responsibilities built into it that would later come back to the House for that the House would then go ahead and kind of create the fine details of the piece of law. Some of the other authorities that the House has is, for example, very similar to what the King of England had, including the power to prescribe rules for the military, issue letters of marque and reprisal, strike and regulate coin, to fix weights and measures, and to declare war. But I thought it was interesting that the House does not have the role of making peace. The Senate was designed to be a different institution. It's similar to the Confederation Congress. Also, there's similarities to the Roman Senate, British baroners, as well as the Massachusetts Senate. The founders were impressed with the Massachusetts Senate because for years they were able to restrain passions, popular passions. Oftentimes, when you're talking about the House and the Senate being made up of being kind of representative of the people, also shorter terms in office. The House is kind of like the counterbalance to the Senate. That the Senate can become very passionate, or excuse me, the House can become very passionate about issues, but then the Senate, because they're supposed to be more statesmanlike, higher qualifications for being a senator, longer terms of office, they're supposed to be kind of the force that calms down the situation, puts them, for example, like the House passed cap and trade, but it didn't pass in the Senate. That's one example, even though the Senate at the time was controlled by Democrats. The Roman Senate, for example, one of its aspects was to basically bring forth wisdom, consultation to Caesar. The Senate also had a similar role. Again, talking about that they were more longer terms of office, a little higher requirements for being a senator. So there's similarities between the Senate and like the Roman Senate. So you see here, direct agents of the state. Now, when I talk about that, up until 1913, senators were selected by legislatures. They were not selected by popular vote. And the way the founders originally had intended it was that the House would be popularly voted representatives, but the Senate would be selected by the legislature. So the Senate would be the voice of the states, and the House is really the voice of the people. And we lost that in 1913 during President Wilson. As I mentioned earlier, the senators can cast different votes. The Senate had different things in a term now. Pejoratives, such as they can again veto an adjournment of the House. They can judge their own elections and member qualifications. They can punish, expel members, and compel attendance. The House has that capability as well. And again, they're supposed to keep a journal. I mentioned a moment ago prior to the vice president and the president running on the one ticket, the Senate would select the vice president if there was a tie. Again, senators were removed from arrest, similar to the House. The vice president was kind of interesting in that when they ran against the president, they're usually kind of equal qualifications. And so the Senate could actually serve as a formal check on the president and the House. One of the statements that this gentleman made in the book. The Senate, similar to the Roman Senate, would give advice and counsel or consent to presidential decisions. For example, nominating and appointing ambassadors, public ministers, councils, judges, Supreme Court. So, for example, when the president wants to choose a new justice for the Supreme Court,